Okay, so I want to move on from this. Let's consider we've done the Quran topic, at least in these, giving these standard sort of arguments. I'll come back with something that is unique here regarding the Quran. This is something that has been discovered recently. People became interested in studying the Quran from a mathematical point of view, to know if things are designed in the Quran. You know, we said there's a design argument for the existence of God. We see the design in things, and we say, well, that has to have a designer. Well, what about the Quran? Is it designed, or did things just simply fall haphazardly into place? When Orientalists, non-Muslims in general, study the Quran, they want to know, why is the Quran arranged the way it is? And sometimes they just give the simplistic argument or the simplistic description that it looks like the Quran is arranged with the longest surahs first and the shortest surahs later. And there's some truth to that, but it's not foolproof, because look, Surah Al-Fatiha is much shorter than the next surah, Surah Al-Baqarah. But one might say, okay, that was just put there because it seems like an opening prayer. Okay, well, let's accept that. But then if you go down, you will notice that the shortest surah of the Quran is actually in A'tainaka al-Kawthar, and that doesn't come at the end. In fact, that's only 3 verses and short ones. And the last surah, Qul A'udhu Birabbin Nas, has 6 verses. So how does that figure? The idea that that it's systematically going from long to short does not really hold. So what was the underlying idea in the composition of the Quran? Well, no one knows exactly, but there is something that has been found, and I'll share that with you. Now, the chapter numbers naturally are from 1 to 114, because there are 114 chapters of the Quran, and that's nothing special about the Quran itself. Any book with 114 chapters may be numbered like this, up from 1 to 114. Now, what will be interesting later on is this particular number. So I want you to notice this number and just to hold it in your memory for a while till we get through this exercise. And in fact, if we do it well, then you will hold it for a longer time. So the sum of the numbers like that, 1 to 114, is 6,555. But think of it as 6,555. It's easy to remember, right? 6,555, kind of number you'd like to have for your telephone number. If somebody asks you, say it with a bit of pride, 6,555. Okay, and the total number of verses in the entire Quran is 6,236. There are different numbering systems, but the one which is widely followed throughout the Muslim world now, and copies of the Quran that you have come, if you open it and you add up all of the you find out how many verses are in each chapter, and you get the total of that. It'll be 6,236. This number is not as easy as the 6,555, but sometimes you can make numbers easy to remember by making them meaningful in some way, or thinking about them in a funny or interesting way. For example, it starts with a 6, it ends with a 6, right? And then in the middle two, the two digits there give you a product of 6. You notice that? 6, 2 3s are 6, right? So if you think of it that way, you'll remember it. 6, 2 3s are 6. So you picture that number in your mind. 6, 2 3s are 6. So that's 6,236. This is the total of the chapter numbers, and this is the total number of verses in the Quran. Now, if we move on, you'll notice that the chapter number, the question now is there a relationship between the chapter number and the number of verses within the chapter? And what has been found is that, yeah, there is a relationship, and it's been discovered in this way. Suppose you took the total. Surah 1 has 7 verses for a total of 8. Surah 2 has 286 verses for a total of 288. Surah 3 has 200 verses for a total of 203, and so on. Now, of course, some results are odd numbers and some results are even numbers. So far, nothing special. That's just properties of numbers, right? Some numbers are even, some are odd. A 1 is an odd number, 2 is an even one, 3 odd, 4 even. And now, if you go with the chapter numbers, then it's alternating, right? Odd, even, odd, even, all the way down. If you go with the number of verses within the chapter, It doesn't follow any systematic pattern. You notice that Surah 1 has 7 verses, which is odd. Surah 2 has 286 verses, which is even. Surah 3 again has 200 verses, which is even. If we went to Surah 4, that's got 176, which is also even. So it doesn't seem to follow any predictable pattern that way. And you can see with the results as well, that's an even result, and an odd result. So it's not going like odd, even, odd, even, odd, even. But the surprising thing is that when you look at all of the results, you will see that 57 results are even and 57 results are odd. Even though so far it wasn't following any predictable pattern, but now we see that as a whole it's equally divided between odd and even results. Now, the even results all add up to 6,236. That's it, 6 2 3s are 6. That's the same number. That is the sum, a total of all of the verses. That's the total number of verses in the entire Quran. And the odd number results, those 57 results which you said are odd, those total 6,555, which is the total of all of the chapter numbers, the sum of all of the chapter numbers of the Quran. Remember we said 1 up plus 2 plus 3 all the way to 114 give you 6,555. So this 6,555 now is also the sum of all of those 57 odd results. I'll show it to you later on in more detail using another set of slides if we have time. But for the moment, you can do this yourself. And if you do it yourself, then it'll register for you more precisely. You know exactly what has happened. How would you do it yourself? Has anyone used the Microsoft Excel worksheet program or something like this? Any worksheet program? You've used one? Let me see your hands if you've used one. Okay. So then what you have to do is open up a program like that. You need one column for the chapter number. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down to 114. Now, beside that, you need another column in which you're going to put in the number of verses within each chapter. So Surah 1 has 7 verses. Surah 2 has 286. Where are you going to find how many verses are in each chapter? How are you going to find that out for yourself? Yeah, open the Quran itself, or if there's an online version of the Quran, you go to Quran Explorer or whatever. You go to each chapter, and you see what is the last verse number. Right? So the last verse number in chapter 1 would be 7. Last verse number in chapter 2 is 286. So last verse number in chapter 3 is 200, and so on. You go all the way down. Put those numbers in. So now you have 2 columns, right? One is the chapter numbers. The second column is all of the number of verses within each chapter. Hit summation at the bottom. So the total of all of your chapter numbers will be 6,555. Sum of all of the verses within each chapter will be 6,236. Now add across. You can do this in 2 steps. First, getting all the results, and then you can separate the results. Odd numbers results in one column, even number results in the other column, right? So let's say you skip the intermediate step. You start separating them immediately. So now you have 4 columns. So first column, chapter numbers. Second column, number of verses within each chapter. Let's say third column, you go all your even number results in adding across. Adding across all the even number results in one column. All of the odd number results in the fourth column. So what you have now is that your total in the third column will match your total in the second column, which is the total number of verses in the entire Quran. That also comes from the 57 results which are even. And then your first column result will match the fourth column result, 6,555. So this elegant formation in which you have like 2 big numbers like this, and it's produced 2 different ways, this is remarkable. And it's not the same as if you add across and add down. Like if you have a column if you have rows and columns of numbers, whether you add them across and then down, or you add them down and then across, you'll get the same result, because you're dealing with the same numbers, right? And it's just that operation A plus B plus C is the same as A plus C plus B. So if you add it this way or add it the other way, you get the same result. Here we've done something different in that we have started with the summation of the chapter numbers. Then we saw how many verses are in each chapter. Then we added the chapter numbers to the number of verses in each chapter. And there is no reason why, by itself, it should come to that to that elegant formation. And now we can see how easy that formation is upset, because this has got 7 verses. We got this 8, and we put that in the even number column, right? Now, suppose we, for somebody wanted to play around and said, okay, you know, Surah 2 has 286 verses. That's got a lot of verses. Why don't we take one verse out of here and put it here, even without taking any text out of the Quran? Let's just make this 8 verses. So instead of starting Alif Lam Mim with its first verse, put one of those verses as part of Surah Fatiha, if somebody did that. So Surah Fatiha would then have 8 verses, and Surah Al-Baqarah will have 285. Then what will happen is that the total from this will be 9, and then it will jump to the other column. And your 6555 will no longer be 6555, it'll be 6556. See that? And at the same time, this column, which used to have the 288, will no longer have 288 in the even column. It will be now 287. And that too will be an odd number. That goes in the last column, and that further upsets your 6555, but in a different way, right? Now reducing it. So if you go from one to another, surah by surah, and if people just played around, eventually you have that this formulation doesn't work anymore. And the fact that it does work like this is an indication that it didn't result by chance, and that there is a mind behind the Quran, like the Quran is in a way designed. And there's only one aspect of the design that has been discovered like this, yes.
This is also to that degree, in other words, it can be by chance. The amount of, like, say, could go on, it's the same with gambling, they make sure they've got the computers to work it out, the mathematical model, then they give you a bunch. You say, okay, this guy might be a million, because gambling would have worked for it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So there are some calculations of the odds, and this is the result. So we wouldn't say that it is impossible for something like this to happen. There is a certain chance that it could happen without anybody intervening and doing anything. But it is remote. It is very unlikely that it would have happened just without anybody doing anything. And the better explanation is that there is a mind behind the Quran that designed it to come out this way. And this is only one aspect. If it was the only aspect, one might say it's a curiosity, but there are so many things that people have found. A website is dedicated to this, put up by the Noon Center for Quranic Studies, based in Palestine. The website address is islamnoon.com. Noon like high noon, but it's meant to be the letter noon of Arabic. Islamnoon, islamnoon.com. Islamnoon.com. So they have most of what they have produced is in Arabic, but there are 2 documents which are given in English, and they're free to download. And that's the sort of information. So I won't have you discuss this now, because this is I think super interesting, and I thought it necessary to put it before you. I won't put you on the spot to try and reproduce this information right away, yes.
Well, the trouble, does it also prove that the Quran could not have been changed, because you would have lost?
Well, yes. If the Quran, first of all, we should be certain that this did not just arise by chance, and second, that if anybody had changed verses, like take verses from one chapter, put it in another chapter, then the system would have been upset. There are some instances where the whole system is not upset if you take verses from one chapter and put in another one. And the way this is explained, you will see in those documents if you go. Sheikh Bassam Jarrar, who composed these documents, actually he didn't do this particular study himself. This is Abdullah Jabloum, who did this as part of his university work, as a thesis. This particular study, but there are others, a number of people combining like different aspects, and all of this information is put together on that site. But the way in which Bassam Jarrar explains this phenomenon is that he would say that the surahs are either homogeneous or non-homogeneous. But that it's not necessary to explain that now, but the short answer to your question is that we can derive two conclusions from this observation. One is that the Quran has a mind behind it who produced it to be like this, and two, that nobody changed it, otherwise the system would have been upset. Okay? And the fact that the system is in place shows us that there is a designing mind, and two, that nobody changed it. Now, when we look at the history of the Quran, how it was compiled and so on, you look at the reports in Sahih Bukhari and other places where it is mentioned that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh commissioned Zayd bin Thabit to get the Quran written down, and then Zayd bin Thabit goes around to everybody who's got something of the Quran, and he gathers it from the hearts of men and from the written pieces and puts it all together. Now, in seeing that process, some people refer to this as an ad hoc process. It doesn't seem like there's a kind of systematic way to guarantee that every piece is put in. Of course, historians generally believe that everything was done on the up and up, and it's quite secure. Like William Montgomery Watt, for example, says that if the way in which it was done was such that nothing that deserved to be included could have been excluded, meaning that it was so thorough that anybody who had something would bring it, so it couldn't have been excluded. It couldn't be that we finished the whole thing and then somebody's saying, but wait a minute, they forgot me and I've got a verse here. It couldn't be that. And then on the other hand also, nothing could have been included that deserved to be excluded. And by that statement, he obviously means that because the system was so open and supervised by people who knew what the Quran was about, because they were contemporaries and companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that nobody could put something in there if it didn't belong in there, because all of these people would object. It's not right, you can't include that. So we know that the process was done like this, and in any case, the Orientalists would describe it as a kind of an ad hoc process, as opposed to a very systematic modern process that we're familiar with. And when you look at that process, one might even step back and say, well, I hope they got it all right. See? So when that is the process through which they were doing it, that it could be described in this term as an ad hoc process, then you know that there is no one controlling human mind. There's no central authority that is legislating this and making sure that the Quran is coming out like this. So the only reason these numbers match up like this is because of the divine mind behind it. It's not a human mind that made it come out like this. This is our point. Yeah. So we looked at other things. Remember, I started by asking the question, why are we Muslims? So this is how we're explaining it from that point of view. So we're Muslim because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a great teacher. His teachings promote peace, promote the status of women, promote human rights, they promote the dignity of each individual. These are things you know already, but I'm putting them in a summary form because I'm now going to have you discuss this with each other. He lived a life that was extraordinarily exemplary. We know that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a messenger of Allah because past scriptures spoke of his coming, and he himself confirmed the teachings of the Jewish and Christian prophets. He made it possible for millions of people to believe in Moses and Jesus and other prophets. Now we're expanding the discussion. We're not just talking to atheists, right? So when we will be talking to Jews and Christians and others. And often, like Christians in particular would be talking to us from the point of view that they've got the true revelation, and what we got is some kind of a deviation or something like this. But we need to turn the tables around, and this is what I like about brother. Is your name Darren? What's your name?
Yeah, Darren.
Darren. Yeah. Darren or
Hamza.
Or Hamza. Okay. So that's what when Hamza was interacting with his colleague, he started to turn the question around. Like, instead of his colleague is asking him, why do you believe in God? But he was asking the colleague, why do you not believe in God? You see? So we need to turn it around and let our Christian friends know that, in fact, it is because we are Muslims that we can believe in Jesus. And I know that we all know one way of saying that. One way of saying that is that we believe in Jesus because we are Muslims. But I want to say it the other way around. I want to say it's actually only because we are Muslims we believe in Jesus. Because as we are now, as you know, we believe in Jesus, right? Some Christians want to say to you, no, you shouldn't believe in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you shouldn't believe the Quran, but believe in Jesus. So would that happen? For many Muslims like myself, knowing what I know now about the Bible, its history, its compilation, history of Isa alayhi salam, history of Christian doctrine, and so on, if I stop being a Muslim, theoretically, it won't happen, inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect all of us, but if I stop being a Muslim, if I stop believing in the Quran, if I stop believing in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I don't think I will believe in Jesus, because there's no reason. See, by virtue of the Quran now, by virtue of believing in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as a messenger of God, I believe in all of the previous prophets, including Jesus. But if I stop believing in this, I have no way of believing in Jesus. Some Christians think that we can leave the Quran and go to Jesus. But for me, it won't happen. And for many Muslims, the same thing, because now we know their history and so on. They believe in Jesus because they have been indoctrinated that way. Right? They've been taught, believe in Jesus, He's your Lord and Savior, and so on. So that's how they believe. And there are many modern studies showing that the Christian doctrines have evolved over time and so on. They're ignoring all of that. But from our vantage point, there's no way we can ignore all of that. We know all of that information already. And if we leave off our belief in the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we're not going to go to believe in Jesus. We might become agnostics or something like this, but not believers in Isa alayhi salam. So Christian missionaries make a mistake if they think that Muslims should leave Muhammad ﷺ and come to Jesus. We embrace them both. And by virtue of being Muslims, we believe in Isa alayhi salam, and only because we are Muslims, we believe in Isa alayhi salam, and it's not going to work another way. So we want to turn the tables and say that this belief is important. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, from a Christian point of view, should be appreciated, because not only do their books, the past scriptures, or Jews and Christians speak of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but the Prophet ﷺ has made it possible for millions of people, 1.some billion people in the world, to believe in Musa alayhi salam and to believe in Isa alayhi salam. And when missionaries from these other faiths go out to try to get people to believe in Isa alayhi salam, our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ already did that for them. Right? So that's the end of that slide, but that's some bit of information there for you to absorb. So let's go over it and see what this was about. First of all, we talked about this mathematical issue regarding the Quran, which I don't expect you to reproduce, but I want you to go home and do that on your own. Go through the exercise so it becomes your own work, and you know how exactly it is done, and then you can present that in future when you talk to people. But then, the other things, like our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a great teacher, but in what way? What were some of the things that he's known for? That his teachings promote peace. And you know verses of the Quran already, so we don't have to mention them, but you will do that in your discussion. Verses of the Quran that talk about peace. Like, what about Lakum Dinukum Waliya Din? This is a verse about peace, right? You have your religion, I have mine, we live in peace, let's get along. Not everybody has to believe in the same thing. Not everybody will believe in the same thing. We believe, you believe in what you believe, and we live in peace. But you might know other verses like Rahabiddin, second chapter of the Quran, 256 verse, no compulsion in religion, and so on. Promoting the status of women. The whole of the fourth surah of the Quran is called Surah An-Nisa because it is heavily concerned with, among other things, the rights of women. Surah An-Nisa, but not only Surah An-Nisa. The 65th chapter of the Quran is concerned about the rights of women. And elsewhere, Surah Al-Baqarah, lots about marriage and divorce and the rights of women for maintenance and so on, even to detail things like weaning a child, nursing a child, and the responsibility of fathers to take care of the mothers when they're breastfeeding and so on. So all of these human rights, if you think about 1400 years ago, when like nowadays, of course, human rights are a commonplace issue, right? But 1400 years ago, people didn't have all of these developed ways of thinking, and yet the Quran, promoted the rights of people, established basic human rights, right to life, right to sustenance. The zakat system, we only think of it from the point of view of charity, right? Man, if you have money, you got to give that 2.5%. We just think of that end result. But like, what is the basic and the fundamental issue here is that everybody has a right to eat. And in fact, when the Quran speaks about zakat, the Quran says that in the wealth of the believers is haqqum ma'lum. It is a known right. There is a right. So what is that right? It is the right of the poor person. So you have the money in your possession, but you don't have a right to that money. That part which is supposed to be given in zakat, you don't have a right to that. You just possess it for the moment, but it's somebody else's property. This is the point. So now it is your obligation to go find that person whose property it is and give it to him. That's the concept of zakat in Islam. So that's the human right. The people have a right to eat. And some say even that if the rich are not looking after the poor, then the poor have a right to take it by force from the rich. So it's mentioned in the introduction to the English translation of Sayyid Sadiq's Fiqh al-Sunnah. So even if we don't go there, but the basic underlying concept is that the zakat is not like just simply an offering of charity. It is like giving the right where it is due. It's a human right. Promoting the dignity of individual. At the same time, the zakat promotes the dignity of the individual, because if somebody has to receive charity, it's not like please can you help me. Like the poor person should know that this is his right to receive that money, you see. And in many other ways, the Quran improves the status of people, and in general, the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have ennobled the children of Adam. The Quran, by telling us about that, people are made into different nations and tribes and different colors and so on. All of these are the signs of God. For example, is mentioned in Surah Ar-Rum that these are from among the signs of God, that He made you into different colors. So that means everybody has some reason to be proud that they are creatures of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of how they look and from whatever tribal stock they come, what languages they speak, and things like that. Surah Al-Hujurat in the 11th ayah tells us that Allah created us, all humankind, from a man and a woman, made us up into so many nations and tribes so that we may know each other. So all of these are teachings that are in the Quran. And the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the fact that it was an exemplary life. Sometimes people raise objections. They say, he went to war. The Christians in particular, Christian missionaries raised this objection because they think of Isa alayhi salam as the Prince of Peace, and they can't imagine that a prophet would be at war. Or let's put it a different way. They're looking for some reason to discredit the Prophet ﷺ, because from their point of view, Isa alayhi salam is the be-all and end-all. Like, God used to send prophets, now God himself came, no need for any other prophets. Somebody comes and claims he's a prophet, we don't have to listen to him, so let's find a way to discredit him. This is how the thinking goes. So how can we discredit him? Oh, he went to war. So does going to war from a Christian point of view, prove that a man is not a prophet? No, because Musa alayhi salam and other prophets in the Old Testament had engagement in war. That doesn't prove that they can't get revelation from God. So why does it prove in the case of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It shows that they're just looking for an excuse to discredit him, and they come up with a lame one like this. Sometimes they say, oh, because he married many women. Is that a reason? Well, what about Ibrahim alayhi salam? He had at least 2 wives at one time, or they would say a wife and a concubine, but in any case he's fathering children from 2 wives. So does that mean that he can't be a prophet of God and he can't receive divine revelation? No. So why does it mean that in the case of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? See, that means you have a lame excuse. You're looking for some excuse to discredit him. You come up with a lame one like this. But when we look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam life, we see that it was exemplary in many ways, and he became a model for Muslims. This is why we take him as a model. It's not because we're stupid people, we just simply follow anybody. But people scrutinized his life. People were looking at him. There were skeptics, there were objectors, and the sum total of all of that is that people rallied to his cause. They believed in him, they followed him, they knew he's the messenger of God, and they saw him as a good moral example. In fact, they knew him to be a very good moral example before he was even proclaimed to be a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They took him to be a man who might settle their disputes and so on, as we know from the seerah. So that is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, bro. You are right in that Christians, not only here in Canada but also here and elsewhere, will argue or talk as if the Old Testament is not known, but it's part of their Bible, and they hold the whole thing up and say that this is the Word of God. So when the Old Testament shows something like this, that Musa alayhi salam went to war and that Ibrahim alayhi salam had multiple wives, they cannot deny this. And you can have a change in law. Law can be repealed because laws generally are suited to time and place. But you can't have a change in ethics because ethics is beyond time and place. Like you can't, let's say it's part of our ethics that we should be fair. So fairness is universal, regardless of time and circumstance. Now, how to be fair in a certain circumstance, that's a different issue. Like what you must do to ensure fairness, that depends on time and circumstance. So that can change. So the specific laws on how to ensure fairness, that will change with time and place. But the whole concept of being fair to begin with, this won't change. So if it is morally wrong to go to war, then this is like an ethical issue, right? So it wouldn't be morally wrong only in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it wasn't morally wrong in the past. So if it was right for Musa alayhi salam, why is it wrong for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So this is what we're saying to them. So they can't say, oh, that's Old Testament, because are you saying that God was morally wrong at one time? And now your God is like morally good, so he's giving you a new book. If something is morally wrong with marrying multiple wives, then how is it possible that God was, in league with people who were doing this morally objectionable thing? So it's not that. It's just that they ignore that. They ignore the Old Testament. But when you call their attention to it, I think they're left without any sound argument or any ground after that. Right? So they ignore it, but we can remind them. Yeah.
It just strikes me that this one talking about peace be upon that he's a promoter of peace, that is so it's a kind of, it seems to me that when we started modernizing, we tend to modernizing as some sort of a social reformer, which perhaps kind of it looks like more like the 21st century than it kind of looked like the 7th century prophet. It seems to me the Muslims kind of like, which some Christians have come to Jesus, they want to take me into some sort seems to me that sometimes I get this impression that we're kind of like modernizing too much. Then perhaps we should.
So what would you have said then? If somebody were to ask you, what about human rights? What does Islam teach about human rights? So what would be your answer then?
I mean, to be honest, I don't know the precise answer, but on the basic level there is that sort of, that is not this teaching. But I think that when they speak about human rights, we need to understand what is it that they have in mind. What do you mean by human rights? What does it mean? Are you trying to sort of like shift the question to understand what do you mean by human rights? What does that entail? So start from Islamic perspective, which is of course what is an Islamic perspective in some ways. But to kind of really kind of like promote it as some kind of 21st century and Islam is like maybe pushing a bit too much than is necessary. It's like some will make him into a saint, some will make him into a Sufi, some will make him into a warrior, some will make him into a... And there's that sort of... some people, different Muslims see it from just different perspectives.
We should be careful to not distort the image of the Prophet ﷺ, as we find in the authoritative records about him. At the same time, we can bring out and draw out the things which are relevant to people in our present time. In fact, this is what we do as Muslims anyway. We look at the seerah, we look at the life example of the Prophet ﷺ, and we take from his life the things which are relevant to our lives in the present circumstance in which we live. Women are supposed to follow the Prophet ﷺ as well, but obviously there's some things that the Prophet ﷺ did by virtue of his being a man, and the women following him would not do those things. But they're still good followers of the Prophet ﷺ, but they just have the good sense to know what he did as a man, and they wouldn't do those. The rest of us, we know that the Prophet ﷺ lived in a certain environment. There are certain things which were happening at the time, certain things were natural at that time. The Prophet ﷺ did things which people would have done at the time as a person of his environment. But how is he an example for us? He's an example for us in these kinds of things. And that's how we recognize him as a great man, and we know him and love him and follow him. And that's what we're telling the others about him, that this is what we know about the Prophet ﷺ. The rest is elementary. If you say he must have ridden a camel because he lived in the 7th century Arabia when people rode camels, you say, yeah, that's not remarkable, and that's not what makes him a prophet, and that's not what makes him an example for us. So we're talking about the things which make him an example, right? So I think these are valid points, and we should just be aware of these, at least in summary form, and then be ready to talk to each other about these. Now, the past scripture spoke about his coming. I need to develop this a little bit further and give you some more details, like where do you find information about the Prophet ﷺ in the Bible. Now, you have Brother Zakir Hussain here, who is an expert in this, so I'll be gone back to Canada tomorrow, inshallah, but you have your local people here who are experts in this field, so feel free to consult them later on, hold more programs, have classes and so on, and pick the brains of these people, because they have that information which is valuable, and we all need to learn it. So we can't learn everything all at once. But I'll give you some pointers. One is in the book of Deuteronomy, and if you want to make a note of this, Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse number 18. There is a mention there of a prophet to come after Musa alayhi salam, who will be like Musa alayhi salam, who will not speak of his own, but he will speak what he hears, and he will tell of things which will happen. This is a mention of a prophet to come after Musa alayhi salam, and he will be like Musa alayhi salam.
Could you give the reference again?
Deuteronomy, it's spelled Deuteronomy, D-E-U-T. E-R-O-N-O-M-Y. Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy. chapter 18, verse number 18. If you were to open the Bible, you will find that the Bible is a collection of smaller books, and each book has a name. So the first one is Genesis, then Exodus, then Leviticus, then Numbers, then Deuteronomy. So this is the fifth book. So if you look at the table of contents, you will find the name there, the fifth name of a book. Yes?
Before you move on, I like to take this opportunity and ask you a question. We may get some help from the ladies. The Prophet himself. The church pastor from Australia had experience in Aceh province in Indonesia. When he finished his mission, he got little result. Little people followed him. And he did back to deliver the stock after his journey to Muslim area. In fact, one lady from his congregation asked him, from her point of view, that why Muhammad is so attractive to women. And we put, for example, Maria, when being gifted to him as a king of Egypt, she wrote a letter, you may have seen this letter in the future. Her description to Muhammad, to the king of Egypt, looks like she attracted to him strongly. So why he was attractive, like very attractive? Does this have a relation with Song of Solomon 5:16?
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Give us help.
Okay, that's an interesting thought, but because I haven't thought that through, I won't stop now, because we have limited time and I have some materials which I want to cover. But Brother Zakir, bear that in mind. You can add that to your whole discussion of this, and maybe we'll see it on the web later on. So that's an interesting point, but we'll leave it for now. So now, Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse number 18, a prophet to come later on, like Musa alayhi salam. So we should be asking, who is that prophet? Because the Jewish scholars never identified a prophet and said, this is it, this is the one. So that means there's an expectation. Now, the Christian Bible is divided up into two basic sections. Tell me what are the names of these two basic sections. Old Testament and New Testament, right? This is why if you pass by the Birmingham Central Mosque, you see they have a sign that says, read Al-Quran, what? The Last Testament, right? Because now we are saying, using that language, we're saying to our friends, this is, you have an Old Testament and you have a New Testament. Okay, this is the Last Testament. Like, somebody writes the last will and testament. Well, this is the last one we have from God. This is what we need to follow nowadays, right? Okay, so now they have Old Testament and New Testament. They call it that because Christians believe that there was an old agreement that God made with people. This was his law. Follow this and you'll be fine. And now God sent Jesus, and now there is a new covenant instituted through Jesus, a new agreement. And that they're referring to as the New Testament. So the books that deal with Isa alayhi salam, and his life and his teachings, where he went, where he walked, and what he preached, and his disciples after him, and other early Christians' letters that they have written and so on, all are compiled together to form what they call the New Testament. So now, the Old Testament for Christians is basically the Jewish Bible. They don't call it Bible generally, they call it Tanakh. You don't have to remember that name, but just think simply the Jewish Bible. So in the Jewish Bible, we have this passage from Deuteronomy. It's the fifth book within the Jewish Bible, and that means it's also part of the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books. Right? So we say the Torah of Musa alayhi salam, and they call it also the Torah. We say Taurat, they say Torah, and that the 5th book is the one that mentions this prophet to come after Musa alayhi salam. And the Jewish scholars never identified a specific prophet. Now we come to the New Testament. What we find in there is that there are 4 Gospels. There are 27 individual books, 4 of them. The first, and now people are still asking, is John the Baptist, Yahya, is he going to be that prophet? And his answer was no. He wasn't. So that means we're still left. There's a vacancy there. Where is that prophet, right? So Christians might say, well, oh, that was Isa alayhi salam, easy, all done, right? However, Isa alayhi salam and John the Baptist lived at the same time. And John the Baptist was still saying that after me will come one who is greater than I am, so great that I'm not fit to stoop down and untie his shoes. Okay? So that's the one to come, and he's saying that was one that's going to come after me. Alright? Now, it also is mentioned in the New Testament, in the Gospels, in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 11, verse number 11, that Isa alayhi salam said that of all of those born of women, there has arisen none greater than John the Baptist. Yeah, Jesus is saying there's arisen none greater than John the Baptist. And that means even Jesus is not as great as John the Baptist, according to that passage, right? Muslims, of course, hold Jesus in high regard, and he's one of the Ulul Azam, one of the great five prophets, and John the Baptist is not among them. So naturally, from a Muslim point of view, Isa alayhi salam is greater. But if one is looking from within the Bible itself, one might conclude about the prophet to come afterwards, then it looks like it's not Jesus, because now it is clear that the one to come is greater than John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is greater than Jesus. So if the one to come is greater than John the Baptist, and John the Baptist is greater than Jesus, that means the one to come is not Jesus, is greater than Jesus. Okay? So if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then naturally A is greater than C, and A is not equal to C. And it so turns out that if you said A for Ahmed, and B for Baptist, and C for Christ, then it makes sense in a different way, right? A is greater than B, and B is greater than C. There you go. Yes. Born of women, yes. Born of women, yes. Yeah. He said, there's none arisen. Of all of those born of women, there has arisen none greater than John the Baptist. Okay, yes. Okay, so that it'll be for them to explain what that part means, right? That's a different thing. They should explain now what does that mean. That he who is least in the kingdom is greater than even him, because they might want to say, okay, so even every Christian is greater than John the Baptist. So where does that leave us? Where is the prophet? Doesn't really get anywhere, right? Interesting, but yeah, close but no cigar. Yes. Yes.
Just going back to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 19, there's also a verse in there simply saying that basically that the brethren like unto you. A brethren means a cousin. So if Jesus was from the Israelites, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the Ishmaelites. So the brethren cannot be from the same lineage of the Israelites, because therefore he'll have to come from the Ishmaelites, because of Ishmael Isaac and so on. So that's a good one which sort of clarifies that it is going to be some cousin from the same lineage of the Israelites.
Okay, let me say something about this. You know, the Old Testament was written, as we said, it's a Jewish Bible, right? It was written by Jewish people. And naturally, they wrote it from their perspective. I mean, it's not like something pristine handed down all the way from heaven and then preserved, as in the case of the Quran. This was people writing down stories, writing down histories, and so on. And they wrote it from the point of view of the Jewish people, and with the presumption that the Jewish people are the greatest people, they are the chosen people of God, and so on. And we can see in step after step that they trace the family lines, and whenever there was a challenge between their forefather and the sibling, it's always their forefather that won out. So we know that in the case of Ismail and Ishaq, Muslims believe in both of them as prophets of Allah, and we respect and love them both. Of course, we're more closely attached with Ismail alayhi salam because he's the forefather of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we wouldn't, say anything derogatory about Ishaq alayhi salam. But in the case of the Jewish scriptures, what they have done is that they have cast Ismail alayhi salam in a bad light. It's like there is this challenge. Hagar has her child, and he's obviously the firstborn, Ismail alayhi salam. And in the Old Testament times, the firstborn had rights over the others. So now there has to be a way of casting out that firstborn so that the other one, the forefather of the Israelites, can take first place. So the writers do this. They create a scenario in which this lad is cast out, and then their forefather takes the position. But it's not only in this case. What about Jacob, who is also one of their forefathers, and he has a brother Esau, and Esau is actually the firstborn. So, well, how do you deal with that? Well, what the writers did here was they, again, cast Esau in a bad light, and they had him sell his birthright. So the story goes that on one occasion he went out hunting, and he was so hungry when he came back that he was begging his brother Jacob for soup. And Jacob said, well, I'll give you this, or stew, food. So I'll give you the soup or the stew or whatever it was, but you have to sell me your birthright. And Esau then said, okay, you can have my birthright, because if I die, what good is the birthright? I may as well get the food. So in this case now, he has sold his birthright. So Jacob becomes now the number one. Just by this kind of story, which anyway, you can decide on the reasonableness of the story for yourself. But it happened there again. The sons of Tamar. That's an interesting story, because the sons of Tamar, one of them would be the ancestor of the Israelites, and the other not. So what did they do with that? Well, the other one is the firstborn. Right? But again, you have to deal with that fact. So they said that the one who was not the firstborn, he had actually put his hand out first at the time of birth, and the midwife immediately tied a string on his hand. But then he pulled back his hand, and the other kid came out first. They were twins. And they come up with stories like this, you see. So, yes, the brother is wondering about the mechanics of this whole thing. So the writers wrote these stories from the point of view that the Israelite nation is the greatest, the chosen people of God, and so everything happens for them and through them. So if they had a prophecy that this prophet to come will be from another nation, would they be predisposed to represent it that way, or predisposed to turn it the other way? No, yes. So this now what we do find is that it says that this prophet to come will be from among your brethren. So Muslim debaters would often say, well, that means it's from Ishmael, and I think this is the point we were trying to make, that it will be from the cousins. Well, you can say that it can be from the cousins, and they're still brethren. They're still brethren, because among these lines, the descendants of the one patriarch were considered brothers. And we see this in the case of the Edomites, who are said to be brethren of the Israelites. According to the Bible, the Edomites having been descended from Esau. And we saw already that there's a clash between Esau and Jacob. So the descendants of Jacob, the Israelites, and the descendants of Esau are considered brethren. They're considered brethren. So we can ask, why not also the descendants of Ismail and the descendants of Ishaq, consider them brethren as well, on the same principle, right? Descendants of the same patriarch. But they will go one further and say that the king of Israel must only be an Israelite. But that's king. But again, that also shows a kind of slant that they're writing it from that perspective. And then they specify further in the book of Deuteronomy that the king must be a fellow Israelite, one of your brethren. So now they will equate, okay? Being an Israelite means being among your brethren. So now they come to this verse and they say being from among the brethren must be from among the Israelites. But it's all within that same scope of thinking of the Israelites as the be-all and end-all. We have to remember that this was written by Israelites for Israelites to champion the Israelites as the be-all and end-all, God's chosen people, and so on. So we have to account for that a little bit. That's why when we use the Bible in this way, we should not expect that the Bible will correspond to exactly and precisely what Muslims believe. But we have to go deeper behind the text and deconstruct it using all kinds of tools that are available, thinking about the social context, history, politics, and all of that sort of thing, right? So we go deeper than just that kind of, like, there are arguments which Muslims have been using for some time and Christians have been responding to, so we have to know both the old arguments and the response, and then we have to have a more developed argument that takes into consideration their response. So that's, I've given you the full scope there, how we respond to that. A question from somebody? I saw a hand go up somewhere. Yes, brother?
Yeah, no, I was asking when you talk about the way the Israelites write everything in their favour. What happened when it comes to Shiloh? Because apparently he's not really from the house of David. So this Shiloh has to be away from it. How do they reconcile?
Okay, question is about the Shiloh. I haven't studied this area, so I can't answer that one. Yes, brother?
Actually, the problem that mentioned in chapter 3, you can explain other way as well. Because the God has a problem with the book of Genesis, chapter number 51, verse number 16, 17, and 18. When the angel comes from the sky and baby was crying and was asked to what's the matter, and God heard your prayer. And they mentioned God made the promise to the Ishmael, I will make you a great nation. That is comes from the brother, right? Already promised with the brother Bani Ismail. Right? The second thing, Jesus Christ gave a warning to the Bani Israel, right? In book of Matthew, chapter number 21, verse number 23. The kingdom of the God will be taken away from you and give to the another nation, right? They will be in the fruit, because God already have a promise to make the great nation with brother, that's Bani Ismail, that is mentioned in the book of Genesis, chapter 21, verse number 17 and 8.
Okay. Jazakumullah khairan for all of these additions. Let me remind you, those that some of you may have just come in later and didn't hear my previous announcements and so on. So what do we want to accomplish here today? All of this is good. What we want to accomplish here today is that we want to have a few points which are key, and we want everybody to know these points and be able to discuss them. And then you can add, when you have discussions with each other, now I'm going to group you up in pairs. You can now discuss, bring everything you have in the arsenal that you have. But bear in mind also that there are some people who do not have much background in these discussions and they want to learn. So we need to start with the basics, right? So few key basic points. Help your colleague to understand these points by practicing now. And let's be prepared at the end of the day to go out. I don't want to expand the discussion because that's for another venue. Like when we have a public lecture, we have like 2 hours just to talk about one topic. But now, today, we have several topics we want to talk about. So we want to go through rapid fire and get the basics of each one. And more importantly, give you practice to go out there and speak to others about it. So no longer will you be telling me or asking me a question, but you will be practicing how you might talk to somebody in a bus, for example. You have 2 minutes before the next stop, and somebody's asking you, well, why do you guys believe in Muhammad? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So now you have to answer. So that's the question before you then. Why do we believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So I want you guys to pair up. So we start from this.